So what we're talking about is the absolute value of x. Now, if I give you y is equal to the absolute value of x, and we make an xy table way back in the day, remember those xy tables? And I plug in -5, 0, and +5. What is the absolute value of -5?
-5.
+5. So that gives me the ordered pair -5, +5. Agree?
Yes.
What is the absolute value of 0?
0.
So that gives me the ordered pair 0, 0. What is the absolute value of +5?
5.
So give me the ordered pair 5, 5. What can you notice about those points?
They're the same.
If I graph those points, 0, 0, what do you notice?
They make like a U.
It makes a
V.
V. And more importantly, it is symmetrical. What's symmetrical mean? It means if you look at the very middle and you fold something in half, the left-hand side will lie directly on the right-hand side without any pause whatsoever. Do we understand that? That's symmetrical. Okay? Now, what you need to get is that all absolute value graphs look like a V. They either look like a valley, can you see this? Or they look like a mountain. They're still a V, aren't they? Okay? You're going to hear me use those two words the entire time today. They're either going to be mountain or they're going to be valley. Okay? Now, chapter 2.7, absolute value is y is equal to a times the absolute value of x minus h plus k. You guys are going to need to move forward. So you can. K is known as your stretch. Now, in this formula, we have three letters that are very, very important, and they do a lot of different things to this equation. If I have A is what we call the stretch or the compress. And I want you to think of A every time as your slope, okay? So if I gave you slope as being, let's say, 2x, is that line going to have a steep slope, or is it going to have a more flat slope? Steep. It's going to be steeper than 1, correct? If I had 10x, would that be a steep slope or a flatter slope? Steep. If I would have 2/3, that would be a more of a flat slope, okay? Now, why am I talking about this whenever I'm talking about valleys and mountains? Because what we're going to be talking about is finding the slope of this line so that we can graph both sides of the arms of the mountain or the valley. With me? Okay? Now, what you need to get is that the A value is what we call the stretch or compress. So if I have my arms in my valley position, my V, and I say, could you please stretch my arms? What would you guys do? If I say stretch, what do you guys automatically do? Pull them where? Up, generally. Okay? If I say to stretch, you guys automatically go up. Do we understand that? Okay? So stretch, and I want you to use this visual. You have a coffee mug in your hand, right? And it doesn't have a lid. Are you going to take that in the car with you? No. What you're generally going to take is a travel mug. What do travel mugs look like?
Like that.
They're taller and slender, right? They're tall and slender generally because they will need to fit into your coffee cup holder in your car, correct? So if this is your regular V, to have a stretch or a travel mug, we simply put our arms closer together. Do you understand? That's a stretch. A compress, if I tell you to compress the trash, what do you do to the trash? You push the trash down, correct? Well, let's take that same concept with my arms. What are you going to do my arms now if I say compress them? You're going to push them down. So instead of having a travel mug, we now have a big old cereal bowl. Make sense? That you put lots of cereal in with lots of milk, right? We have our travel mug, we have our regular, which is going to be our absolute value, and then we have our nice little cereal bowl. Okay? Do we all get that? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay? So stretch means your slope is going to be positive, whole number. A stretch is going to be whenever you have a whole number. A compress is going to be whenever I have a what? A fraction. Do we all understand that? Yes or no? Excellent. Now the H. The H is what happens. H affects the horizontal shift. In other words, I'm not going to change the shape, but I'm simply going to pick it up off the board and I'm going to move it left or I'm going to move it right. Do we understand that? The K value is whenever we're going to pull that off, and we're going to move it up, or we're going to move it down. Okay, that's the K value. Now, what this thing does is it gives us a very unique specific point, and this point is called HK. HK is our vertex. The vertex is basically the point on the graph where it's the lowest or the highest point. And this is where you also change direction. For example, I'm a valley. At the bottom of a valley, you have what? A point, and that point is going to be the minimum value. When you have a mountain, at the top of the mountain, you have a peak, right? That peak is called its what? Highest point, or in mathematics, we call that, instead of a minimum, but a maximum point. Do we understand that? Okay, do you hear all those words underneath those terms? They're very important. Okay? The next thing I need you to think about is called the axis of symmetry. The axis of symmetry is basically where I take my V, or my mountain, and I say, where can I cut this thing in half so that whenever I fold it, it lies directly on top of its other side? Well, the axis of symmetry is going to be a vertical line. And all equations of vertical line are in what form? All equations that are vertical are in what form? Vertical lines are x equals a number. Horizontal lines are y equals a number. Do you remember this? Think back. Okay? X equals a number is a vertical line. Now, why are you thinking I would put x equals h as my vertical axis of symmetry here? Because it's your horizontal shift, and I want the x-coordinate of my vertex. The x-coordinate of my vertex is known as h. Do we all understand that, yes or no? Now, AOS is what I abbreviate axis of symmetry. So if you see AOS on your paper, what am I actually referring to? Axis of symmetry. Excellent. Now, we already talked about this a little bit. Now, if I have a is less than 0, what if the number is less than 0? Negative number. So if my slope, which is a, right? A is slope. If my slope is negative, what does that thing look like in mx plus b? Is it going uphill or is it going downhill? It's going downhill. Well, I don't go uphill or downhill when I have a mountain or a valley, do I? Okay, so if I generally have a valley, meaning I have a minimum, but my A value is now negative, what happens to my lovely little V? I can't say I'm going downhill, so what do I do instead? I flip it over, and now instead of having a V, which has a valley, I have a mountain, which has a maximum peak. Do we understand that? So if your A value is less than 0, it's called reflected, and it makes a mountain. If your A value is negative, it's called reflected, and it makes a mountain. And if you're getting sleepy eyes on you, you better wake up. Now, if your A value is larger than 0, meaning a whole number, I should have put 1 there, but I wanted you to understand that if it's larger than 0, I am going to have a valley. Okay, do we all understand that? I will have a valley. But we need to even go a little bit further than that. Okay? If it's a fraction, we talked about this already, that means it's going to be compressed. Right? Compressed. In this super slope. And if it is going to be a whole number larger than 1, I'm going to have a stretch because it's going to be a travel path. We all understand that. Okay, well that's all excellent. Now let's go ahead and see what happens whenever we apply this. If I have a generic number, let's say k, and I add that to my absolute value, what's happening to it? Look at your paper again, the first page. What does k do to it? What does k do to your graph?
It'll give it a vertical shift.
It gives it a vertical shift, so that means I'm going to go up how many units?
K units.
I'm going to go up k units. Do we all see that? If I have absolute value of x minus k, what happens to the graph there? I'm going to go down k units because minus is going to mean down for the k. So if it's a plus k, it means up, and if it's down k or minus k, that means down, okay? Now, let's check out the h. If I have minus h, you would think the same rules would apply, like they do for k, but they're not. It's the opposite, because our formula is always x minus h. So we would instinctively think this thing is going to go which direction, to the right or to the left?
Left
You would instinctively think it's going to the left, but it's the opposite of what you think, so therefore it's going which direction?
to the right.
To the right, h units. Okay? Next, I have x plus h. Instinctively, which direction would you think it's going?
Right.
You would think it's going to the right, but since it's inside, it's actually going which direction?
To the left.
To the left. Okay, and that brings us to the very last one down here. I have the absolute value of x plus h plus k.
To the
What
left.
does the h do?
Make you go to the left.
It's going to the left h units. And what does the plus k do?
Goes up.
It's going to
K
go
units.
up k units. Okay, that is all beautiful. Okay? Now what I want you guys to do is I want to apply this when we are given an actual values for them, for A, H, and K. Okay? Now, we're going to make this very procedural. What have we been talking about so far is H and K, correct? So I want you to tell me, what is H in this problem?
5.
H is going to be 5. So is that going up, down, left, or right?
Right.
It's minus 5, so it's going to go to the right 5 units. What does R5 mean? Right 5. I'm very lazy. I'm not going to write it all out. So it's R5 means the right 5. What does the 3 do?
Goes up 3.
That is responsible for the vertical shift, so it's going to go up 3 units. Do we all understand that? Now this is a beautiful thing. Oh, nope, because that's my A value. Rise and run with my A value. Good thoughts. Okay? H and K come from your horizontal and your vertical shift. Okay, so my vertex is known as HK. H is known as your horizontal shift. So if I'm going to the right 5 units, is that positive 5 or negative 5? Positive, because the numbers to the right of 0 are positive. If I'm going to figure out K, K is known as your vertical shift, meaning up and down. So if I'm going up 3 units, is that positive or is that negative?
Positive.
That is positive 3. So this is my vertex. Do we all understand my vertex is the point 5, 3? Now after you find your vertex, the vertex is responsible for helping you find your axis of symmetry. Because isn't your vertex going to be your highest point or your lowest point? Which isn't that half of your graph? Do we understand that? So now I can find my axis of symmetry here. So my axis of symmetry is always in the equation x is equal to h. What is h in my problem? H is going to be known as 5. So this is going to give you x is equal to 5. Everybody's writing this down, correct? Okay, well this is all beautiful. We have our axis of symmetry, we have our up, down, left, right, and we also have our vertex. Now let's deal with the A. The A tells us if we have a mountain or a valley, it tells us if we're stretched or compressed, and it also tells us our other points by using our slope. Do we understand that? So what is A here?
2.
A is going to be the value 2. Okay? A, is that going to be a stretch, meaning greater than 1, or a compressed, meaning a fraction? It's a stretch because it is greater than 1. So I'm going to have a stretch of 2 units. Okay? Now furthermore, is A positive or is A negative?
Positive.
Since A is positive, am I going to have a mountain or a valley? Think of it in slope terms. If A is positive, am I going uphill?
No.
Or if A is negative, meaning going downhill?
No.
If A is positive, which means I'm going uphill, which means I'm going to have a valley. Do we understand that? The valley is the typical V, okay? If A is negative, that means I've reflected it and it makes it into a mountain. Okay? I literally am like flipping it over. Bam. I'm flipping it over. Okay? I'm not flipping it over here, so if I have a valley, do I have a max or a min?
Man.
I have a minimum. Okay? Now, this is all great stuff. Okay, now how in the world do I find how do I graph my other points? Okay? If I graph my vertex, how do I get the arms of my graph?
E. Well, 2 in for X.
What does
Or
2
not, 5
represent?
equals-
Hey, it is your what? Your slope. So if A is your rise over your run, which is your slope, that means I have 2 over 1. Since A is positive, from my vertex, I'm going to go up 2 units, and then I'm going to go left and right 1 unit. One more time, you're standing. So I'm going to come over here to my graph paper, and I'm going to graph all this information. So what do I have to start off with?
5 over 5.
I have to graph first my vertex. Let me graph point 5, 3. There's my vertex. Now, what do we know about my vertex? My vertex is what? Is it a valley or a mountain?
Valley.
It's a valley, which means my vertex is actually going to be a minimum value. Do we understand that?
Mm-hmm.
So from there, I'm going to do what?
Go up.
I'm going to
to-
go up 2 units, and then to the right 1. Up 2 units to the right 1. Up 2 units to the right 1. Did we see the right-hand side of my V? How do I get my left-hand side?
Same way.
I go up 2 units, this time to the left. 1, up 2 to the left, up 2 to the left. Do we all see that, yes or no? And I'm simply going to connect them in a V. Okay? Now, that gives me my V, but how do I graph my axis of symmetry? Well, my axis of symmetry is that invisible vertical line that if I fold it directly in half, they'll lie on top of each other, correct? So I'm going to draw that right at or right through my vertex. Do we see that, yes or no? We good? Let's do it again, shall we? Negative 2/3 times the absolute value of x plus 2 is minus 1. What's h? H is 2, so more importantly,
Maybe
which
to the
direction?
left.
I'm going to go to the left 2 units. What's the negative 1 do? Goes down 1 unit. Now from here, what can I pull out? The vertex. What is my vertex?
2 comma
Left
negative
2 means
Negative 2 comma
negative 2. Down means
Negative 1.
negative 1. Everyone should be writing this down. Now, what falls out of here after you find your vertex?
Your AOS.
Your axis of symmetry comes out. Axis of symmetry is always x is equal to h. So what is going to be my axis of symmetry here?
Negative
X is
2/3.
equal to negative 2. Okay, well that's wonderful. We talked about our h, we talked about our k, we found our axis of symmetry. Now what do I need to find?
The A.
My A value. My A is going to tell me all kinds of information. What is my A?
Negative
My A is negative 2/3. So A is negative, so what does that mean? It's reflected, so instead of having the traditional valley, I'm now going to have a mountain, which means instead of a minimum that goes with a valley, I now will have a maximum or a peak with my valley. Or I'm sorry, with my mountain. So this is going to be a maximum at my vertex. Do we understand that? Now, is this going to be a stretch or a compress?
Compress.
It's going to be a compress. And since I'm a mountain, what's another word I could use? Peak or max, yes. What did I do to the graph? It was like this. Now, what did I do to it? I reflected it, okay? So that's another math word that I definitely want you to be using. Reflected is why we get that mountain look. Do we understand that? Now, what am I going to do with that 2/3, which is my slope?
Flathead.
We're going to keep it. That's my slope is going to be A, which is my M, which is my rise over my run. So that means I'm going to rise. Rise means I go up. But in this case, I'm a mountain. So what do I do? I'm going to go down 2 units. And then I'm going to go left and right. How many? 3. Do we understand that? So now let's go over here and graph this. Now what do I start off with?
Your
Negative
vertex.
2,
My vertex. So I'm going to start off where?
negative 2,
Negative 2, negative 1.
-2, -1. And from there, what do I do?
go down 2 and to the left
Down
3.
2 and then to the right 3. Down 2 and to the right 3. Down 2 and to the right 3. This is my right side of my V. Now I need to get my left side of my V. So what do I do? Down 2 and then to the left 3. Down 2 and to the left 3. Do we see the V, yes or no? Okay. Now, if I connect these, there's my V. Where's my axis of symmetry? Straight through my vertex. That's my lovely little axis of symmetry, and I've graphed it. Do we feel like we understand this, yes or no? We getting it?
Yeah.
Excellent. I'm going to skip the next 2 problems here, and I'm going to go straight to the last 2 problems on the back of your notes page. And I'm going to do that because I want to make sure I get through everything I need to cover today so that you guys can do your homework, okay? Now, the last 2 examples that I have for you, we're working backwards. Previously, I gave you the equation, and then you had to graph it, correct? Now what I'm doing is I'm giving you the graph, and I want you to find the equation. Okay? So we're going to take all the steps that we did previously, and we're going to go backwards. So what was the first thing we did whenever we graphed?
Put the vertex in.
We found the vertex, correct? So what's my vertex here? My vertex here is going to be -1, comma, +4. So we write down your vertex. Vertex is going to be -1, 4. Okay? Now, next, what do I do? H and K, right? So that means if I use my formula, which is y is equal to a times the absolute value of x minus h plus k, I now know what h and k are, correct? I know that -1 is my h and +4 is my k, because that's what vertex is. Do we understand that? So I'm going to plug those into my lovely equation. So y is equal to a times x minus h is -1, k is going to be +4. What's minus a negative?
Positive.
A positive. So that's going to be y is equal to a times x plus 1, absolute value of +4. We good? Now what letters stay in this equation? X and y stay. So what do I need to find still? A. And what does A stand for? A stands for the slope. So wouldn't it be very, very helpful for me to find A by finding another point on my graph? So if I find another point on my graph, I'm going to do rise over run. So that's up 1 and then over 1, 2, 3 units. Do we see that? My A value is 1/3, correct? Now what we did not talk about is this a mountain or a valley?
It's a mountain.
It's a mountain. What in the world does a mountain do? Why do I need to ask that question?
It goes down from the peak.
It goes down from the peak, meaning
The slope will
what?
be negative.
Meaning the slope is negative. What did you say? Same thing? Meaning your slope is negative. Since I have a mountain, that requires my A value to be negative, which means what? That I'm going to have a maximum. Okay? Because you're climbing the mountain to the maximum point. Okay? So that means my A value is not going to be positive 1/3, but instead negative 1/3. And you simply plug that into your equation, and you're done. Do we understand that?
Yes.
Shall we do it again? Yeah. Okay, 29. This is one of your homework problems. Step 1, what should we find?
Vertex.
The vertex. So if we find the vertex first, what is that ordered pair?
5, comma 1.
My vertex is 5, 1. That's wonderful. What does the 5 represent? H. What does the 1 represent?
K.
K. So if I come over here and write down my formula, what can I plug into my formula now?
H and
I
K.
can plug in H and K. So Y is equal to A times X minus H. 5. And what's K? 1. Excellent. Now how do I find A?
You gotta find a point on the graph.
Got to find another point on the graph. So if I find another point on the graph, that puts me right there. Okay? Will any point work? You all can pick as many different points as you want. The slope will still be exactly the same every time. Do we understand that? Okay, excellent. So now, A value is going to be the rise over the run. So that's going to be 1, 2 units that I rose, and then I'm going 1 unit over. So that gives me a slope of being 2. Correct? Now, what's the next question I ask myself?
Is it a mountain or a valley?
Is it a mountain or a valley? It's a mountain. Why do I want to know if it's a mountain or a valley?
Because that will mean your rise over run's negative.
That would mean that your A value, which is your slope, has to be negative because this thing has to have a maximum value. Then that means it's going to be reflected. If A is negative, we have a reflected value. Do we understand that? That means I have for my final answer Y is equal to negative 2, absolute value of X minus 5 plus 1. Do we see that, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, tonight's homework is out of the book, and it's problems 8 through 28 even, and then 29 through 8 through 28. What do I want you guys to do? I want every transformation. What do I mean by transformation? Up, down, left, right, axis of symmetry, stretch, compress, reflected, mountain, valley, all that information that you would need to graph this. Do we understand that?
Yep.
Then for problems 29 and 30, I want you to follow the instructions, which is just simply coming up with an equation. Monday, when we come in here, we're going to graph all of this stuff so that you guys are able to figure out how to graph it. Any questions? I'm going to be very picky about this because what we're getting into a family of functions, and I'm introducing one family of functions to you today. And I really want to make sure that today you do my up, down, left, right. Later on, whenever we get into the other ones, I'll let it slide and I won't make you do all that. Okay? We're going to be graphing them on Monday. You do not have to graph them tonight. Okay? Any other questions? Huh?